in the next 2 hours. We're being recorded. We're really excited to welcome back Lindley Daly. And our discussion today, best practices in self-care during challenging times. Today, the topic will be focusing on strategic planning. And if you come back to visit us again in October, we'll be doing the topic a little bit more on the self-care. So excited about that as well. I just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, the Wisconsin Public Service Foundation, which provided the Community Foundation with a grant to have this partnership to provide continuing an opportunity to explore some topics that would be important to our nonprofit community. So thank you to Wisconsin Public Service for providing that grant, which allowed us to bring in Lindley Daly. Also, the fact that we can do this virtually. We have Lindley joining us from New Mexico. She is with Daly Consulting with 30 years of experience in the corporate and social sectors. Lindley is a seasoned leader in philanthropy, a transformative coach, and an entrepreneur deeply committed to partnering with leaders to help their organizations grow. As a coach consultant, she blends her unique expertise in strategy, customized professional development, thought leadership, and organizational framework designed to support nonprofit leaders and their boards to fill their agency's mission. We love to bring a speaker of this caliber in to help us look at our own organizations and move forward so that we're able to do good work right here in our community. So Lindley, I'm going to turn it over to you. The next 2 hours are yours.
Very good. Thanks so much, Sue. And thanks to Jenna and Tim for inviting me into this conversation to hang out with you guys today. I have a bit of a Wi-Fi issue, so I'm hotspotting. So if you're wondering why I'm freezing or you're freezing or whatnot, it's probably me. I'll own it. Comcast is not my friend this morning. Really delighted that you all are here. I'm going to probably have more slides than you could possibly ever want. You probably are looking at them today. I tried really hard. If we were in person, we would be sitting with our teams and we would actually be doing some of the strategic planning work together. And I'd be coaching and facilitating some of that work within your teams. But unfortunately, I'm here with you virtually. And the great news is that I get to explore what's happening in your spaces and share a little bit of what's happening in the Southwest. And so this is really, this is a conversation. It's really not a presentation. So if you're able to keep your videos on, you can mute or unmute depending on your noise, but really stop me, interrupt me, interject, raise your hand. Meet me in the chat box. I'll try and catch all of those as you're scrolling through. And we'll just have some dialogue. Strategic planning has this notion that it's like really hard and it takes forever to pull people together and it's a lot of work. And so it's really not. We can actually simplify the process to suit your needs. And I get right now, I was telling Sue and Jenna earlier, I'm doing a bunch of strategic plans because facilitations, people are hungry to get together physically, to meet a particular board, particularly boards are, and to really have these generative ideas. Additionally, now that we're starting, cross our fingers for good, to move out of the COVID and into new ways of business, perhaps, opportunities may have presented themselves during the time that we were hunkered down. We were probably in chaos, then moved into acceptance, and then hopeful opportunities presented themselves. And so it's also a wonderful time to check in with our mission and vision and values to see if they're still relevant or if they need some editing. So we're going to talk about this process. And because I don't have you in a room and I can't break you up into groups, we're really going to talk about what is strategic planning and why it's important. What does it mean to have a facilitator? And then we're going to talk about leadership. It's really, really critical for leadership. And that is leadership at the staff level, the executive level, and that is also board leadership. And whether you know it or not, your board's job, one of their highest tenets is strategic visioning, looking at the organization from a strategic view. So we're going to get into some details with that. So here comes the slides. I'm going to share them with you. Again, please do not hesitate to raise your hand, interrupt me, because if I get sucked into my slides and I miss the chat box, don't hesitate to interrupt me. All right. So real quick, you've introduced yourselves, but I'm curious to know where you sit in function. I know we've got some development officers. I know we've got some program folks. So if you could real quickly share with me, what I don't have up here is consultant, so I probably won't do the poll myself, but if you could take a minute and fill this out. And let me know. And then Jenna, if you could send me the results, that'd be great so we could see where we are. You feel free to pop it in the chat if you want and kind of pay attention to that. Oh, look at that. We've got a lot of program director and staff. Cheers to development and executive directors. We have one or two board members. I'm so delighted that you're here. Thank you. We don't have anybody in finance. What the heck? So curious. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, you guys. All right. Let me get out of this. Super. I have a pretty good feel for what sectors you all are in. So we'll just, Sue mentioned me. Here's a couple things about me if you weren't here the last time. What I do want to highlight though is I actually have a bunch of partner consultants I work with. And not only do I do presentations, workshops, and retreats, particularly around strategic planning, my group also has the opportunity to do a lot of recruiting. We do executive and board recruiting, which is pretty fun. We also do capital campaigns, done them largely in New Mexico and Texas. We have a communications arm for our work, particularly emergency communications, which came in handy in the last year. And then I also have a partner that I work with on branding and marketing. So just a little bit on our rules for engagement. As Sue mentioned, if you can stay in view and on screen, that would be terrific. Just like we would if we were in person. Use the chat box, raise your hand, interrupt me. Again, this is a conversation, preferably not a presentation. And take notes, please. If you have technical issues, you might try refreshing your screen. I might try refreshing my screen. And then lastly, generosity of intent. It's how I choose to show up in the world. Also, I invite you also to consider that is really assuming that everyone is showing up with generous intention, with doing the best that they can. So sometimes I know I get sucked in to the hard stuff and I don't always see the generous intention. So I will request grace and offer grace as we need it. So let's get into this. Let's talk a little bit. What is strategic planning? This is our agenda for today. Why is it important? Who sits at the table? Who's in your arena? What does it actually look like? The pre-planning work, the actual thinking, and then what is that outcome in the aftermath? What is strategic leadership and why is it important? And then we'll get into the good stuff. So I'm really curious. Tell me a little bit. Do you have a current written strategic plan? Really curious here. A lot of people have shared with me, not necessarily here, but folks that I work with, we've got a plan and it sits in my drawer, or we've got a plan and I have no idea where we sit according to that plan. I don't even know when the last time we did a plan, or no, we've never done strategic planning, or actually I have no idea. So sometimes boards will say that. Will share that with us because they haven't actually seen your strategic plan. So great. Most of you have strategic plans. That's great. Maybe you're coming to the end of your season for your strategic plan. Some folks have strategic plans and it's nicely sitting on the shelf or in a drawer. And then there's a few of us that don't or don't even know. Great. So we're going to solve that for you and we're going to go dive a little bit deeper. So here are some of the questions I always like to ask when people invite me into dialogue around strategic planning. Do you know what a strategic plan? Why do you need one? Who's involved? What's involved? Should we get a facilitator or can we do it ourselves? How are our mission, vision, and values? Are they still relevant to what we're doing? What are the areas we might want to focus on? What's our time horizon? It's really interesting. I'm not seeing too many. I've had one person ping me for a 5-year time horizon. Most of my time horizons are falling somewhere between 18 months and 3 years. And it depends on your organization. My young organizations that are startup, maybe a year or 5 years in, they're really in kind of they've got a 3-year plan, but they're really kind of in that 12 to 18 month cycle. Some of my bigger organizations or higher ed, they're definitely looking at 3 to 5 years. And then what kind of format, what kind of structure does the strategic plan actually look like, and the process actually look like? And there's a lot of different processes out there. I'm sure those of you that have strategic plans or have sat in on the process will know that it can be organic, it can be incredibly structured, it can go over a period of a couple days, we can do it in 3 or 4 hours. So we'll explore that a little bit, and I'd really love to hear from you what that looks like. So for the purposes today, this is how my group defines strategic planning. I always use the word roadmap, but more importantly, it is a working roadmap. It doesn't sit in concrete and is immovable and is stagnant, that if you don't hit your goal, you scrap the whole thing. It's actually a working roadmap where your organization is going. It is the forward thinking motion, right? How it's going to get there, what kind of key measurements or metrics will let you know, those benchmarks that let you know that you're on your way, that you're staying the path, and you're going to hit your goals and meet success. And so why do we need strategic plans? Again, we all need the roadmaps to know not just where I am as an executive or I am as board chair is going for the organization, but it provides the sheet music for everybody in the organization to understand the direction. It helps staff and board stay on that same page and communicate a little bit more effectively, creates ownership and consensus building. It also creates measurements and metrics that help us in our grant writing, right? Grant writing is super critical in so much of this work, right, Peter? You probably can relate to that. It inspires generative ideas. And for those of you that are sitting on boards, we have 1 or 2 of you here, that generative idea, that big idea thinking is really critical, really important, and actually really exciting. Offers the action plan. And so we have a strategic plan that sits at higher altitude, and then we have action plans that are the day-to-day implementation that staff has the opportunity to follow. And then also our strategic planning and the process allows us to prioritize that which is really, really important to the organization and its leadership during a certain period of time. Okay, so I am really curious. With this information, what have you all seen? Is there anything missing that those of you that have strategic plans, that have done strategic planning process, is there anything in here that's left out that you have found have really been instrumental as you move forward in your strategic planning process? I'd love to hear from you. Laura, with Big Brothers Big Sisters, does yours, Girl Scouts, does your strategic plan come from the mothership, or do you get to direct it at your local shop?
Yeah, so we actually get to direct it at the council level. So it is individual to our specific councils. So that's really great. Yeah. And I'm like a super huge fan of strategic planning anyway. I so dig it. And I think it's because I've been part of so many other organizations' strat planning processes, and it was always really a positive thing. Yeah. I'm kind of interested to dig in a little bit on the action plan piece of it too, because we're kind of in the middle of our current strat plan, and we've done some restructuring in our council. So I'm bringing that interest to this conversation today.
Super. And thank you so much for bringing that out. Connie, as a leader of your organization, what's most important for you in the strategic planning process of why you do it and what maybe you're looking for?
Our plan so far has been really, really flexible. So it's changed within, even though it's a 1 and a 5 year, we have been changing it to meet. We changed buildings, COVID came in, just all sorts of various things that we didn't know were going to happen. So our plan has been, thank goodness our president has been on top of it. And so a lot of our meetings, we talk a little bit about strategic plan, almost every board meeting.
Brilliant. Oh, I am so glad. I'm going to use you as an example as we travel down the path on this. Thank you so much for sharing.
Okay.
And Ruth, I have to keep the plan's components in view to stay on track. Beautiful. Yes. Yeah. And not just you, Ruth, but your team, right? And your board. And to Connie's point, revisiting the plan on your monthly or quarterly basis, depending on when your board gathers, is absolutely critical. So thanks so much for sharing that. So who needs to be involved? You know, it's been really interesting. I've always challenged organizations to involve key leadership and the full board. And I'm actually finding, I've got an organization right now that only wants to do it with staff, trying not to judge. However, I think, you know, for ownership and implementation purposes, I think it's really important to include as many key stakeholders as possible. Including your board members, including key staff. Generally, in my experience, that key staff is usually a CFO and your CDO, your chief development officer, as well as your executive or your executive leadership team. If you have one or two key volunteers, especially if you're a highly driven volunteer organization, it might be helpful. Some stakeholders, maybe one or two big donors. I have not seen that in action yet, but that may be relevant for your organization. And then, you know, do you consult or do you not consult? Do you have, as far as having a consultant in the room, do you have a facilitator or not? Whatever your choice is in this, it's really about being intentional about how you develop the team within this group so that you have your plan on track. Kaylee, thank you so much for sharing. You have a 1, 3, and 5-year plan. That's great. That all of the leadership members of our agency collaborate, work through, discussion is held on various areas. That's excellent. I'm curious, Kaylee, and you can pop on if you like. How big is your organization? How many people?
We are agency-wide. We're about 150 people, so we're fairly small. Yeah. We have 5 locations across the state of Wisconsin, each ranging, depending on the location, it can be about 15 to 35 people.
Very good. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Actually, that would be a mid to larger size organization in my hood. So yeah,
I feel like it's small.
People. Yeah, well, 150 people is actually quite a lot. So I can see why you would have various teams engaged and involved. I can see why that would be really important to make sure you're stepping up. So Ruth, a wild journey of the last year, heck, understatement of the year. They continue to learn right alongside each other as necessary measurements. Yes, measure. And that's why revisiting, Kaylee, to your point, is really, really critical because yeah, your metrics are going to change because of COVID or all these wonderful unforeseen experiences. So yeah, I was going to have asked the foundation not to be part of it as we look into the next 4 years, but they beat me to it by saying they didn't think they should be part of it. Excellent. And if that works really well for you, outstanding. So let's talk a little bit about facilitation. And I'll tell you an interesting story. I was pinged to do a facilitation for an organization for the second time around. As we got closer, I'd done all the background work for them. As we got a couple days out, they asked me not to come. And I was like, geez, you know, I've done all this work for you. You're not going to have a facilitator. This is crazy. At the last minute, they said, please come back. We really do need a facilitation. This is the board chair. And I said, she also happened to be a friend. I said, friend, can't do it because I'm not prepared anymore. I said, here's the deal. If you want to facilitate this, you're fully capable, you're intelligent, you know the direction of the organization, but you have to facilitate. I strongly recommend you only do one or the other. Right? So if your group, your leadership, your board really want to participate, it may serve you well to actually hire a facilitate if they really want to participate and be involved. Because I find that if I'm involved and facilitating, my brain is actually working in 2 different spaces. So just some ideas if you're thinking about facilitation. You've got somebody that's objective, both visually and in listening. You've got candid data, especially in the pre-work, which we'll get into, that when I go in and I talk to individuals in leadership, both for the board and staff, folks tend to be really real and honest and very clear and direct with me. Everybody can play, and you end up with this really nice connectivity. And again, why I'm seeing so many boards ask for strategic retreats is because they're really ready to get together and start some generative ideas. It also a facilitator allows the opportunity to guide the group, especially if there happens to be some level of conflict or dissent in the group. And that facilitator can also encourage consensus building. It drives, if you've got somebody that is really good at intuiting and asking solid, powerful, open-ended questions, it can really create some terrific generative thinking and high quality discussion. And then it also fosters participation, because as an objective facilitator, it's our job to sit back and encourage participation, whether it's through chat, whether it's on the screen, or whether it's seeing a hand raised. And Sue, I'm going to ask if there, or Jenna, if there are any hand raised, please point them out, because I can't see everybody on my screen to that point. So here are some questions. Do we really need a facilitator? Is this the first time you've done strategic planning? Was the prior plan not so great? Did it sit on the shelf and not actually get implementation? Are there different views? And you maybe don't have anybody in the organization that does facilitation work. Key leaders actually want to play and they don't want to facilitate. And then motivation might be lacking in your organization. If you said yes to any of these, it's likely that a facilitator would be quite helpful for you. All right, I'm going to pause. And I'm going to open up the floor to see if there's any questions at this time. I feel like we're kind of tracking pretty well here, but I want to make sure I'm not missing anything, any questions or insights on this. Anyone? Ron, you on track? Kelly, you good? Everybody's good?
Good, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, great, Ann, thank you. All right, super. All right, and back to the program. All right, so strategic planning. Most of you know what it is and have seen it sometime in your travels, right? So let's talk a little bit about what that might look like. To pause in our programming, it is wildly critical to have appropriate strategic leadership, okay? And this is both from the board of directors and the staff. When we talk about leadership, Susan Ward defines it as the art of motivating a group of people to act toward achieving a common goal. Really, really important. And that is leadership at every level. It's really important for our executive leadership to lead the charge. It's really important for the board. Most importantly, BoardSource will tell you that is one of the 4 tenets of board leadership, in addition to the fiduciary responsibility, the policy setting, and risk management, and then the actual governance of the board itself. That the strategic view, how it relates to the mission of the organization and the long view, is actually a huge responsibility of the board. And that those boards that lean into that strategic engagement actually have higher board performance than those that don't. And as a reminder, our boards, most of them, unless they're working boards, which is usually with our smaller or younger organization, most of our boards sit at a higher altitude, right? They're at that 20 to 30,000 cruising altitude. If we're talking plane, we're all ready to travel, right? So our executive staff, again, the art of motivating a group of people to act toward achieving a common goal, that's more at the day-to-day level, right? We get support from our board at the high level, and then our day-to-day strategic leadership, that tends to be more at a lower altitude, the more of the day-to-day work. And the executive has the responsibility of balancing the strategic visioning with the strategic doing. And that goes right back to the action plan, right? Of what are we doing and how are we doing it on a day-to-day basis. Now, I'm going to dip into a model that I use out of the table group. It's called Working Genius. I love this model. It's super fun, super simple. And I'm finding, in fact, I'm using it with Big Brothers, Big Sisters here in our state. I'm finding that it's a great space and place to develop language around leadership, around genius, around our skill sets, and around productivity. We're even having conversations around this, on this topic around hiring. So there are, the table group talks about this working genius model. There are literally 6 different geniuses that are all critical for the good of an organization, for the good of programs, for the good of meetings, right? And there's not one that's better or worse than the other. All 6 of them are critical, and they line up within the realm, I think, that fits so beautifully in strategic planning and doing. So we know that work starts in the ideation stage, right? It begins with ideation. And so many times we get these great ideas. We love it. It's super, we're ideating, we come with great ideas, and we move right into implementation. In doing so, we miss this activation part. And oftentimes we haven't discerned whether or not that program or that idea is actually going to go anywhere. So when we talk about these 6 geniuses, we're talking about wonder, really the thinking, the dreaming, the person that is constantly asking those questions in your team meetings and may be driving you crazy. And I believe me, they're feeling it too. Invention, the power of invention is the individual that can create something from nothing. A blank whiteboard is their dream. That's their happy place. Discernment is the person that is highly intuitive. They're the folks that people come to help solve problems or to think things through. They're generally the individual that says, yeah, I think that'll work, or I think about 60% of that will work. Maybe we need to ideate about that a little bit more. Let's go back to invention. Galvanizing is really critical to this process, because galvanizing says, all right, we've got the plan. It's time to move forward. Let's go. I need you, I need you, I need you, and I need you to come together. And the enablement person that has the genius of enablement raises their hand and says, I'm here, I'm with you. What do you need me to do? And then finally, tenacity, the genius of tenacity is that individual that gets great joy and great energy out of pushing projects over the finish line. So as you can see, wonder and invention sit in that ideation space, that high altitude, right, of thinking that really is critical for strategic planning. And then as we move down that altitude view, the galvanizing and the discernment are going to be really critical to determine if the plan makes sense and sounds valid, and if we can actually begin to implement. And then when we get into implement, enablement and tenacity are critical to actually get the work done and push it over the end line for success. So you'll notice in your packets, I'm going to pause here in just a minute. You'll notice in your packets that you have definitions. So I've included that in there. The last piece that I want to speak to on the working genius, again, when we talk about genius, we talk about everybody's got 2 genius and everybody's got 2 frustrations, and then the 2 in the middle are our competencies. So when what our hope is that we spend most of our day and most of our work living in those 2 geniuses. And we spend the least amount of our day or a short period of time in our working frustrations. During the course of the day, hopefully we're traveling through wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity, whether they're our genius or our frustration. We typically get to embark on a little bit of all those every day. The hope is that you're not in tenacity, tenacity is one of my working frustrations. I hate finishing things. I mean, I like finishing things. I like checking them off in my box, but it doesn't bring me joy. And it doesn't generate energy. Though I also know that if it's a short period of time, there's stuff I actually have to finish. So I know that I can focus on that. So our hope is that when we are working in our genius, it doesn't even feel like work. We're in flow, time goes by, we are energized, we're in the minute, we're in the work, and it doesn't even feel like work. So this is really just an altitude exploration. Again, what we see here is in our higher altitude, that 25 to 30,000 foot altitude is where wonder and invention generally sit. Down as we begin to think about landing the plane and get into the lower altitude, we've got the activation geniuses of discernment and galvanizing. And then as we begin to land the plane, land the project, complete outcomes, turn in the grant, that 5,000 feet to 1,000 feet is really where we get into the lowest altitude. Again, we probably, those of us that are grant writers have probably had some experience in that space. So just to give you some idea of how we play with those geniuses. So I'm going to pause here again and open the floor. That was a lot of information to dump. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is this, does this help or hinder, or is it irrelevant in your strategic planning as you think about it? Anyone? Anyone? Sue, tell me a little bit about what you're doing. Does any of this resonate with your work?
I actually am going to defer to Tim a little bit, as far
Thank
as,
you,
you know,
Tim.
what we have going on at the foundation. Do you mind, Tim?
Not at all. So the foundation is 33 years old, and I'm new to it. I came in about 8 or 9 months ago. So a little over a year ago, I believe, was the first time that the foundation actually worked on a formal strategic plan, and the board led that initiative, hired someone to come in and facilitate it, and created a strategic plan to work from that we are still working from today. And as I've come in, the staff is more for the next strategic plan, taking the leadership to drive the strategic plan, but still including the board. So we're making a little bit of a shift for our next plan, to have us kind of drive completing it with involvement from the board. And so it's a little bit different approach. We'll be doing that next year. So our strategic plan will be completed or revised every other year. And then we'll work to the current plan for, you know, a year, 2 years. So that's kind of how we've done it. Whether we bring in somebody from the outside to facilitate next time, we haven't decided that yet. But it has allowed us to bring in more discipline on a daily level, an ability to track progress toward goals and toward impact, that I think we've learned a lot from after the first time that we had one implemented, that will make the next one, I think, much more effective, much more focused on impact and how we can help lead making this the best community in America. And that's really our goal.
Nice, very nice. I hear a little vision statement there.
And I actually think that some of the things that we did in that strategic planning process and the way Tim has used it within our office has really helped him to acclimate to the organization and to kind of determine where our next move is. So I think it's been really helpful to have that in our back pocket.
Yep, and it helped us develop individual specific goals to track. So we have kind of our dashboard that we track on a regular basis. And I think it's helped us to say, yeah, maybe this goal wasn't that important. We're going to focus on something else. So it's helped us have some real discussions and make some trade-offs that hopefully help us create more value for our community or for our nonprofits or for our donors as we move forward. So it's been able to bring us some focus that we hadn't maybe had in the past.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim,
And
for
I
sharing
see
that.
Anne from the Salvation Army had her hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Anne.
Yeah, I did. I didn't know it didn't show on my end, but I just had a question, and you're probably going to cover this, but have you noticed that when you're in the dreaming phase, the inventing phase, that you've got the galvanizers that say, okay, we got the ideas, let's go?
That is an
How did-
awesome question.
How do
Yeah.
you deal with that?
Yeah, no, that's really a great question. So there's a couple ways. And actually, that's not just in strategic planning. You can see that, Anne, in meetings, right? This is a generative meeting. We're going to stay at high altitude, and you got tenacity coming in, the person that wants to finish it, coming in and saying, what? Which causes turbulence, right? If we're using the plane analogy. And so everybody puts their brakes on, especially if everybody's been sitting at high altitude and they're like, holy cow, we just dropped to 5,000 feet, right? So great question. And that's really facilitator or the lead stepping in and saying, I hear you. Can we stick a pin in it? And we're still in the visioning stage. We're still doing strategic visioning. And yeah, we're going to get, I hear you. That's a great idea. Let's put this on this page over here. I usually have lots of pages going on. Getting into the strategic elements of the actual, as we go from higher altitude down into the lower altitude. Also, I just finished a planning process with an organization. It was actually really complex and challenging for me because they would not get out of the strategic place. And we're going to get into definitions, but by strategy, that's what I mean is the things that you do to accomplish the objectives and the goals. So the goal, if you think about altitude, is sitting up there at the 25 to 30,000 foot level. Your objectives are the metrics that will keep you on track to that end goal. And the strategies are the doing that help you meet your metrics, but also ultimately help you accomplish your mission. Right. And so most organizations, maybe not so much the board, but certainly when we work with staff, they show up and they're already deep in the strategy. Okay, we got to get a development plan and we're going to do a capital campaign. And on top of that, we need to expand this program. We need to cut back on this program. And they're already in that strategy, that lower altitude thinking. And so the job during the initial work of strategic planning is to elevate that discussion of, yeah, I see that, but what's the bigger idea? So great question, Anne, great question. We have turbulence that happens all the time in strategic planning, but it happens in meetings as well. What other questions are out there? What's been your experience? Megan, maybe you've had some experience with this, or maybe you're one of the ones that haven't done strategic planning.
I sat in on a little bit of strategic planning this spring and it was a good opportunity. So some of this is pretty new to me.
Oh, fantastic. One of the things that I heard you say, Tim, is that who drives the plan? Initially, the first time you talked about this, you said your board drove the plan. And this time around, your staff is driving your plan. And that may also get to some of this conversation about what level or what altitude do we show up for the planning discussion, right? Are we going to stay at a lower altitude because we have more things that need to get done? Or really, are we thinking of the great, massive, creative impact that our organization can have 10, 20 years down the road?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the board, and they did work with the staff on this, although I feel like the board, I wasn't here, but it feels like the board probably drove most of it. But they really worked to develop a strong vision and mission for the organization. But who's best to figure out how to accomplish that mission but the staff and those of us who are working day to day with donors and with community members and with other organizations and with the nonprofits in the community. So, I don't see our vision and mission changing on a regular basis. Of course, that's sort of a longer term goal. And so at this point, I do believe the staff are the best people to lead, on the ground, and they really know how we can accomplish our mission and vision. So now we've made that shift for us to be able to really own the tactics that we're implementing in order to accomplish our vision. And there may be a point in a couple of years when the board wants to take the reins again and say, hey, it's time to really adjust what our vision is or something like that. And then it may go back and forth a couple times as to who's really leading and driving the strategic plan. But
that's a great.
It gives a lot of ownership to the staff to be able to really, say, hey, board, here is what we're going to do to accomplish our mission.
Yeah, Tim, I really appreciate that conversation. And you all will note too, that in the course of this work, Tim is looking at the long run and then at a shorter run, at the long run and the shorter run. So the long run was the board, I'm guessing, please correct me if I'm incorrect, but the long view was the board engagement of we really see a much bigger conversation of the bigger, deeper, big, hairy, audacious goal further out there. And that goal still exists, but during this next strategic planning process, it's really more about the groundwork, the day-to-day working. And so then it's really a generative conversation with staff. So, and that's going to shift with organization to organization, depending on the age of your organization, the size, the function. You know, when you have foundations, it's a different conversation in philanthropy than it is perhaps more at the boots on the ground, the direct service organization. So thank you for bringing that up, because that is kind of a really nuanced perspective. Anybody else have any thoughts before we take a minute? I'm going to let you guys take about a 10-minute break, go eat, check your emails, fill up on coffee, whatever you need. I think that's what I have coming next. Yep, I do. But is there anything else that maybe you wanted to add to this conversation? I don't know, Linda, where you might sit, or Kelly, any other thoughts?
Not at the moment, I don't. This
Super.
is all very helpful.
Oh, good. Kelly, where you're with a big organization, say a little bit about what you do and how strategic planning applies to your work. I'm really curious.
Sure. So we're a regional campus and our main campus is in Milwaukee. So we have many different levels within the strategic plan. We're at the point right now of developing our regional campus goals in relation to the different goals that have been kind of cascaded down to us. So we're just kind of entering in our individual goal setting. So this is really timely for me. We're also facing a lot of transition right now. So it's good timing.
Yeah, great point, Kelly, too. A lot of times we forget that strategic planning conversation, right? That has to be married, not strategic planning, excuse me, succession planning conversation that has to be married in this conversation. And not just succession planning for your executive, but succession planning at the board level as well. Are we thinking a year or two down the road as we evolve and rotate leadership through our organization? Do we have a big enough board matrix that allows us to think much broader about what we may be doing in growth down the road? Maybe it's a capital campaign, or maybe it's initiating a massive new program. And do we have the right leadership at the board level? And do we have the right staff in order to accomplish that? And so this is some of that big idea. And again, to Tim's point, what's the big idea? And is that still pretty constant? Is that still our 5-year plan? And then when we bring it a little bit closer, how does that impact the human factor, our players internally and our players at the governance level? And then, you know, it's all interconnected. How does it relate to us financially? How does it relate to us structurally, et cetera? And we'll get into that a little bit. So I'm going to take a break. You won't have to listen to me for 10 minutes. And let's see, it is 53. So 11:53 your time. Let's circle back around noon. Take a break. You can hop off camera. I'll still be here, and see you in a minute. Whoa. Hold a minute. All right, are we ready? It's about that time. Everybody find something to eat. Get another cup of coffee or Gatorade. Go out and do 10-minute yoga sessions. Meditation, deep breathing, depending on the stress level.
I think my coworkers would probably tell me I should do some deep breathing sometimes, but I didn't go do any yoga. I went and found a snack.
Yep. Carla,
Good
can you
call.
just breathe for once? Just breathe.
She has people to talk to. She's got asks to make. She's got friendships to evolve and relationships to invest in. There's no time to slow down. Although I hope you have a massive self-care plan, Miss Carla. No, sister. Oh, we're gonna talk about this in October.
Mhm. We'll stay on the call.
We'll talk after.
Carla, I hope you're registered for that one in October.
I am. Feel like it's a confession, but yes, I am.
Well, I would say every person that I know that works in the nonprofit sector struggles with self-care. From all the way from executive to front desk operators, that it is really hard to take care of ourselves in a space where the work is so demanding, the need is so high, and the resources are often limited. So, not judging. There is a generosity of intention in this conversation. All right, let's talk about actually strategic planning. We've done some of the kind of defining and what does it look like? How do you think about it? How do you move forward toward strategic planning? What does it actually look like when we get to it? And I will share with you, there are a lot of different structures for strategic planning. There are a lot of definitions out there. Some of them mean the same thing. Some of them mean different. It depends on how you approach them. So I'm going to set, for today's purpose, simple framework, simple definitions for our work. So vision is the why of what we do. It is that preferred future, that big, hairy, audacious goal that is sit out there, the big problem that y'all are trying to solve, right? Solve poverty. We're trying to ensure that every child has a full belly. Everybody has roof over their head, or is free, or has the mental health resources that they need, or has the ability to read, to function in society. So, or has a buddy, a big sister, a big brother that can walk with them through adolescence and into the future to think differently. So that big vision is really that future preferred state, or that the big goal that we're trying to hit, that problem that we're trying to solve. Mission is the how we do it, right? It describes what you do, for whom, and the benefit or the impact, right? So what you do, for whom, and the benefit. And typically, if you're stating your mission statement, you want to kind of make sure those kind of elements are in that mission statement. I will tell you, in the work that I'm doing right now with a number of organizations, they're revisiting mission. I don't always see, usually vision stays pretty constant unless the organization completely goes through a regeneration. But I am seeing missions change. I'm seeing people, because of COVID, new opportunities present themselves, new ideas evolve. And so missions are being edited. And when you get into your generative conversation with both your board and your staff, or even perhaps with staff only, or just with board only, and it might be a really amazing thing to talk to a couple of your donors or other key stakeholders about, how has our mission evolved? Have you seen something new? Are there opportunities that we might be missing with our current mission that we need to think about as we grow forward? Okay, so mission and vision are critical. Values, we'll be talking briefly about values as well. They tend to be, if you think of a tree, they tend to be that trunk, right? We have roots, our own personal values that are the roots of the tree that holds and anchor us as human beings. We have the values or core principles of the organization that is the tree trunk. And oftentimes I see personal values of staff and board totally intersect with the core principles or the core values of an organization. And then we have the branches, which is the infrastructure of the nonprofit that delivers the services, and the actual services are the fruit of the tree. So I use that metaphor a lot when I do strategic planning as we talk about vision, mission, and values. Okay, goals. And I'm talking about strategic goals. These are the long term, that broad goal that aims for the fulfillment of the mission. That is the cruising altitude view, right? It's that big, big view that allows you to, or helps you attain that mission out in the future. Okay, so it's a big idea, right? The objectives are the metrics or the benchmarks or the measurements or the key results along the journey as you're going down to achieve your big goal, right? So they help you keep on track and let you know if you're on target or you're off target, right? And it's over your time horizon, whether it's a 12 or 18-month strategic planning process, or maybe it's a 3-year strategic planning process. You've got a year 1, year 2, year 3 planned out. So your objectives are those benchmarks. They're how you know that you're on target and on track. And if you fall off, that's great. That's great time to sit back and reassess. Strategies are those broad activities that help you achieve the objective, which ultimately help you achieve your goals. So it's the strategies are the doing part, right? And I think, I don't know, I think, Anne, it might have been you that was talking about people coming in at the strategic level when we actually need them to think about the higher view, right? And so rather than, the way I practice is I try to meet the organization and the players where they are. If they come in at the strategic doing, I try to involve them higher up. I usually open with the conversation about vision, mission, values, and that starts people out at the very highest level anyway. So we stay up at cruising altitude for a minute. So strategies are the activities, the doing part of your strategies. And then work plan. And I think, Laura, this is really where your question came in. The work plan or the action plan is the day-to-day stuff that staff builds out. At least that's the way I coach it. So strategies is the collective development that lead to your benchmarks, that lead to your higher goal, right? The work plan is when staff takes that strategic plan, probably with the help of key committee chairs, takes it back and says, this is what the month-to-month development looks like, how we will build that out. Now, if I had you in a room, we would actually go through all this process. And Laura, I'm sorry, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of doing the action plans, unfortunately, because it requires you all to do your work. But I can certainly answer any questions that are directed in that direction and see if I can support your curiosity that way. So there's our definitions for the time being, all right? Now, let's talk about the tool chest. I do a bunch of work when I do strategic planning, and you can too, before you even have to pull, let's, for sake of argument, pull the team together, pull the group that is doing the strategic planning. When it's usually, in my experience, has been board and key staff. So the pre-strategic planning conversation happens with SWOTs, that's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I do that as a blind SWOT. I send out a form, I say, send it back to me. I don't even keep track of who sent it to me. I just gather all that material up, and it's a great tool. It's a pain in the patootie. It's a standard, it's almost a cliche for strategic planning, but it can be really valuable. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. I generally, if I'm working with a board, I will have them do a self-assessment. There's 10 or 12 questions on that self-assessment that all relate back to board source standards for participation as well as global governance. And there's a metric. It's like on a scale of 1 to 10. And so each of them fills that out, and then I do an aggregate. But more importantly, there's 2 questions at the bottom of that self-assessment. One, are there any absolute necessary strategic ideas or big ideas that you absolutely want to see discussed at the strategic planning process. And number two, what needs to stop right now? What activities, what behaviors, and I don't mean like personal behaviors like stop picking your nose. I mean, what within the organization has to stop for us to be more effective, more efficient, and provide greater impact. And then oftentimes facilitators will do assessments where they'll meet with each of the participants, typically either key board or all of the board, depending on the size of the board, and key leadership, and ask 5 or 6 questions. And they sound like, what's working? What's not working? How would you describe the organization? If you were sitting in a cafe, what would people be saying? What's the greatest impact? What isn't happening that needs to happen? And so these are really kind of bigger ideas to get folks thinking and talking about essentially what's working and what's not working and what needs to change within an organization. And then there is this conversation about nonprofit life stages. And I actually love this tool. In fact, I have both of these tools. So I have the life stages, this might be backwards to you, but I have the 5 life stages of nonprofit organizations. And I also have the other one, which is nonprofit life cycles. I like this one better. It's a little bit more user-friendly. The language is, in my opinion, kind of flaky, but when we talk about life stages, they're exactly what we think of about human life stages that I find really incredible. So they look at the functions within the organization, the arenas within the organization. And that's governance, what your board is doing. It's leadership, who's leading the organization on the internally. Staff, hiring, firing, turnover. Looks at your financials. It looks, including fundraising. It looks at your marketing. And it looks at, there's one other that it looks at, and I can't recall what it is, but they take all those arenas. It's a deep assessment. They take all the arenas and then they tell you where you sit on the spectrum of the life stage. And those life stages are, one, the idea stage, which is like the very beginning, the ideation space, right? You're not even a 501c3 at that stage, where you're inspired and you imagine what the nonprofit could be. The second stage is the startup stage, which is really about founding it and framing it. The third stage is growth, where you ground and grow. That's where you actually have revenue coming in and you're delivering services on a broader scale. Maturity is the fourth stage, and that's where you're still producing really good fruit, if we go back to that tree analogy, and you work to sustain the organization. So you've got some sustainability, you've got some longevity in the marketplace or the ecosystem. The fifth stage is regeneration, and that is where the organization could become very stale. And so you rethink and you renew. How can we reiterate? How can we grow, expand? How can we think differently? Are our services still valuable? And then unfortunately, the sixth stage is terminal, right? Is where the organization doesn't have the resources, the services are no longer required, it doesn't have staffing, it's not functioning anymore. And that's where it may decline and dissolve. And so, or it could regenerate and go back into that fifth stage of how do we review and renew what we're currently doing. And so when the assessment is done, it highlights where in these 5 different stages you show up. And so you can actually pull out, maybe governance needs some focus and we need to expand our board or develop our board. Maybe our leadership has had a revolving door. We've had a couple executive directors in the last 5 years and it's really struggling with the organization. Or maybe our marketing is on fire. Everybody knows what we're doing. So that one is a stage that we just keep status quo because we're killing it there. Or financially, we know that we need to hire. And so, our staffing is probably in the lower stages. And financially, we are probably need to boost that up in order to staff up. And this just develops some language as you move into, and some ideas as you move into strategic planning. So I really like these 2 tools, and I'll leave them, they're in your pack as resources. So, all right. Again, here's the conversation of vision and mission. And this is where I start. Let's take another look. Let's take another look at what our vision and our mission say. And 9 times out of 10, we actually get into deep discussion about mission. Is it still relevant? Do we have a problem with some of the language? I try not to wordsmith because that's an exercise in frustration, right? We can wordsmith later, but are you actually doing the work for whom and what's the benefit or impact, right? And so that is an incredible place to start. And I find that in doing so, you set your North Star. You can't go anywhere if your North Star is not accurate, right? So this helps us establish the North Star, give us direction for where we go in the next space. That's also, frankly, where you have that values conversation, right? Are our values still relevant? What maybe changed during COVID? Did we renew or create a DEI statement? So does our mission need to reflect the work that we're doing in JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion? And if so, how do our values change? Are we going to include equity or inclusion in our values? So this is a lot of organizations are now shifting that conversation a lot more. Where is the resource packet that has been mentioned? Sue or Jenna? You will probably get, it's not really a resource, it's the PowerPoint presentation. Megan, so I think Sue, are you going to send that out or Jenna? Can you answer that for me?
I think Jenna sent that out yesterday.
Okay. Super.
We can send a follow-up email too if there's things we
definitely.
missed. Okay.
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Sorry, I paused. I paused in my excitement about mission, vision, and values. All right. So the next tool I use is the SWOT. And this is actually taken from one of my clients, so don't read it. I'm not telling you who it is, but this is an amazing tool. I take these blind SWOTs and I aggregate all of what is said in these SWOTs for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And if you're wondering what the asterisks are, those are things that have been said multiple times. And then we digest this and we talk about current state and future state. So in my opinion, I use strengths and weaknesses as the current state dialogue. What's going well? Where are we weak? And what needs to change in those spaces, right? So that's my current state assessment. I also find that even though I put these up on the board, most organizations come up with all kinds of new ones when we get together and start this discussion. You can do this with Post-its. It's really great. You put up 4 different big white sheets on the board and you just have people put Post-its up on the wall, plus it gets people moving. So I find it to be an incredible tool to start highlighting what's working and what's not working in current state. And then the future state really is opportunity and threats. How will we think bigger? What are the opportunities to grow and expand? And then what are those threats to those opportunities? Not just to the organization, but to those opportunities. And so I use this in a myriad of ways. In how we evolve. I just find it a great tool. The other thing that the SWOT analysis does is it starts the conversation about themes. If you, as a facilitator, can think about what are some of the outstanding themes that are coming up through all 4 arenas. Is it about staffing? Is it about the board? Is it about programs? Is it about finances? Is it about fundraising? You're going to start seeing so much. I can look at about five SWOTs and I can tell you where the conversation will go in strategic planning. It just puts so much on display. Oftentimes I will pull up just the strengths and we'll highlight the top 3 or the top 5. It usually ends up being like 10, right? Because people don't ever stop at 3 when I say stop at 3. So in each of these categories, I'll usually pull out 3 to 5 to 8 highlights of that which people really, really find critical for their organization. And then it builds out great conversation. So we talked, right? I mentioned this conversation about current state, right? Current state and future state. So the next stop that we make on the strategic planning conversation is where are we right now? And we look at the SWOT. We talk about our strengths and weaknesses, but we also talk about our current resources. Generally comes up in strengths and weaknesses. We also talk about who are our partners and our supporters, who's out there singing our praises, who's not, Who are our detractors? Who's our competition? Who's disrupting our work? Who, and are those resource providers or potential resource providers? Because if our current resources are being disabled by detractors or disruptors or partners even, then there's even a deeper conversation as you get into the future state conversation. So we will spend a considerable amount of time talking about the current state. And then we do visioning and we talk about future state, which is really where boards want to sit, right? Boards really love to sit at that high level. And I think it's brilliant, again, back to Ann's point, is leveling up the thinking of staff. Staff can so frequently get stuck sitting with the worms at the grass level, not even at the 1,000-foot level, but we're like sitting, hanging out with the worms, right? In the grasses, because there's so much work to be done today. And we can get so narrowly focused and tunnel visioned in the work that has to be done that we exhaust ourselves. And we aren't able to see the bigger mission, the why we show up every day and work so hard for our constituencies, for the people that rely on us, right? To distribute money or to make sure they can read or to make sure they've got a buddy, to make sure that they've got the resources as seniors, to make sure they've got medical care. Sometimes we're so deep into the day-to-day or the administrative work that we are not looking up. And this is where we get to inspire staff to think bigger. What if we got a massive bequest? What if we got that $1 million grant? And I will tell you, 2 organizations I have the privilege of working with just received $1 million. Each of them received $1 million in the last 4 weeks. I mean, it gives me chills to be able to say that. 2 of my clients received $1 million. And in our state, that's massive. That is transformative. So what happens? What would happen to your organization? Dream big. If you receive that transformative gift, what would that allow you to do? Where would you go? What opportunity would it create? What threat might it create? What potential resources would it allow you to reach toward? Would it leverage, right? This is when I do visioning, I probably drive some of my clients crazy because I'm like, okay, close your eyes, sit still, close your eyes, don't open, don't peek. If you can close your eyes and you're comfortable, close your eyes. Think about, okay, you're at a cafe in your community and you're sitting next to a couple tables and they're talking about your organization. What are they saying? Think about 3 decades from now, your organization has delivered massive impact and you're getting an award for that. What is the announcer that's presenting you the big $1 million gift because you guys are awesome? What are they saying about the impact that your organization has had on the community, the state, the country, the world? What does that look like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like? What colors are there? What are the words that are coming? And so we get people into that generative, the bigger thinking. 20 years from now, how much more funding are you providing? What does your community look like? What are the needs in the community that impact you? What does your sector look like? So what does housing look like? Where's your homeless population going? What's poverty look like for your people? What are the littles talking about? What are your bigs talking about? What are your seniors saying? So, and who are the detractors? Are they people you want to listen to? Or are they just people that are jealous because you're so fabulous, right? Are they truly disruptors in a good way? Or are they disruptors in a negative way? And do they need to be addressed? What are the barriers for moving forward? So getting into this higher level thinking, and that's when you start asking the conversation and then you come back. Virtually, I do this in a Google document. You can use Jamboard, which isn't quite as easy. It's kind of a Post-it thing. But I'll have people write down the stuff that they think, or we'll start this dialogue of what came up. What are the big ideas? What did you see 20 years down the road? And in that conversation, we end up uncovering themes and big ideas. And you capture all of them. And sometimes there's 10, sometimes there's 20. Most staff already know what they could do more with, right? How they would create more, how they would create bigger. Most staff gets that. But I've worked with a couple incredible foundations that have, massive assets, and they actually can affect deep change in our education system in northern New Mexico. And they're craving this conversation of, if we had all the money and need was not, that the financial need was not, it was no longer an issue, what change would we do? How could we change education in the state of New Mexico? That is a big question, right? That is the big question, and how we challenge our boards to think even bigger, outside the box and beyond, okay? And so when we start having those generative conversations and deep discussions about what the bigger idea is, a lot of stuff comes out, and we capture all those themes, those ideas, those commentaries. And some of them are at the strategy level, and some of them are at a much higher altitude, capturing all of those. And I find, I will say, that most of them fall into these 4 categories. They're going to be financial. They may be programmatic or service delivery or service specific. They're about the internal structure. Do you have enough staff to deliver the goods, right? Do you have the right leadership in the right place? And if you're Jim Collins, do you have the right people on the bus, which means what's your culture, right? Are the people in your organization subscribing to your culture? And if so, do you have the right people in the right seats, right? I had a conversation with one of my very first client 6 years ago when I started my organization. And they are really struggling in the development space to keep people in that space. We know that's really hard. The turnover in development is 12 to 16 months. It's crazy. It's hard. I don't know about your sector, but I mean, in your community, but our community, it's been really hard to find longstanding people that will actually ask for money. And she said, the person I have in development is not right. I said, but is she right for the bus? Is she aligned with your values and your culture? And she said, yes. I said, it sounds like to me she's in the wrong seat. So she ended up switching 2 people in the organization. And the person that was in development is now in accounting, and she couldn't be happier. She found the right seat. And so sometimes we have to look at how we look at staffing differently. And if you want more information, Working Genius can actually help you do that from a different view. Might give you some insights. So if you're interested, ping me and we can talk a little bit more, and I can show you how that works. So some big themes and big ideas. So I'm going to pause here. I am super curious to hear from you. I don't know if this is proprietary, but what are some of the big themes and big ideas that are coming up for you in your organizations that you need to write down, that you want to carry forward, that are going to help your organization and help your staff and your board? What are some of those ideas? And are they falling within some of those four areas: finance, programmatic, or service delivery, internal structure? And then that growth piece can often be a capital campaign, can be a new initiative, a new program, a redraft of an existing program for expansion, iterating, franchising. I have lots of organizations in my space that are doing a bunch of that. Growing your board, shrinking your board, building out podcasts. I don't know. So what are some of if you're willing to share, I'd be curious to hear, what are some of the big ideas that are starting to come up for you, for your organization? And then if you're not willing to speak, I get it. You can put it in the chat or just write it down so you can capture that for your own strategic planning process. So I'm curious. Thoughts? And I see you're, I see you thinking. What's coming up for you?
Oh my gosh. I was trying to narrow it down.
Right now, don't narrow it. Don't narrow it. Name one thing.
How much time do we have?
Right.
I only meant narrow it down because of our time constraints here.
Sure.
But yeah, we are doing all of the above. I mean, we have, last year we got new officers. We're in the process of strategic planning for capital campaign because we need new facilities. And of course, I'm the person that goes, okay, let's stream first. let's dream first before we plan. Let's look at the needs assessment. Let's see what the community needs. Let's see what we're doing that's not working. Do the SWOT analysis, figure all this out. So that's where we are right now. And there's programs that we know are needed. And there's, wonderful programs that the Salvation Army has that other communities are doing. And we're saying, hey, we should be doing that here. So we're like, where does this fit? Where does that fit? And, the whole, the whole needs analysis thing. And it's just, so that's where we're at. We're kind of doing all of the above.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing, Anne. What that triggers for me is the thinking of what's working, but what do we need to say no to as well? Because you've got a lot on your plate, and do you have the staff and all the resources to actually execute? So if we say yes to this, what do we need to say no to, right? Again, my process is a much more organic in group. The way I play, a lot of facilitators work really structured. I have a whole fantastic book. If you're interested, this is a great book, and it's in your resources. It's the Executive Guide to Facilitating Strategy by Michael Wilkinson. It's phenomenal. It's an incredible guide to talking about strategic planning. But yeah, what are some of those questions that you're asking yourself about? Where do we need to grow, or where do we actually need to dial back, or what program is actually fading and our ROI on that program is less than favorable? Ron, what thoughts are coming up for you in the work that you're doing at Naomi?
I would say right now in our community, the big issue is a resolution called a Community for All, which is a kind of a focus on inclusion, diversity, and equity. And there's lots of pushback. It's very controversial. We're involved in it. And what we're trying to do is to work with the marginalized communities to kind of highlight their strengths and needs. And so we have a program coming up in a couple of weeks in collaboration with a group of young Hmong professionals to talk about their journey in Marathon County, past and present. And so we're looking at networking with some of these groups and trying to bring education and information to the community to help people kind of know about and decide their position on the issues, because this particular resolution is probably going to come up for vote in a couple of weeks, and it's a hot topic. I'm sure many communities are dealing with the critical race theory and all those kinds of cutting edge, difficult kind of areas, and that's where we're involved.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Ron. And you coincide beautifully with Kaylee's conversation too about some of these policy issues that are challenging organizations either to change the way they work or to up their game in the way they work to comply with state or federal shifts in some of those dialogues, and even some of the DEI, Ron, work that you're referring to, whether it is specific about inclusion and diversity, or if it's critical race theory. Our education systems are really pushing that. Voter rights may impact some of our organizations. So yeah, all of that is really valid. Thank you so much for sharing, Ron. I appreciate it. Peter, what are you seeing as some of maybe your big ideas? I mean, as a grant writer, you get to be the storyteller in them. So I'm curious what your thinking is.
Well, I'm actually fairly new to the Literacy Council, but I just kind of piggybacking on what Ron said. I do also live in this community, and I think every single person on the Zoom call can relate to the tension and the difficult conversation that Community for All discussion has really instigated, and it is definitely something that our organization is a part of. One thing, when it comes to big ideas, and I know Connie would agree with me because she's actually the one who taught it to me and told it to me. We don't want the Literacy Council. We don't want no in our vocabulary. That's kind of the what she always wants to push for us, where we don't want to say no to anyone. And when I started right off the bat, you know, I was thinking, my background is in policy analysis, and I immediately went to this place where I'm like, well, we can't be all things to all people. We have to have this straight, you know, very strict vision and this very strict direction. And you know, and my executive director Connie immediately said, no, that's not the way we're operating. We want to cast the broadest net possible, and yeah, no, we don't say no to anyone. So that is when it comes to, say, grant writing, that is a challenge that just is on a day-to-day basis, where developing a focused project, for example, that I can sell to a grant maker, while at the same time staying true to our overall vision, where we are a very broad umbrella organization. And it is a challenge, but yeah, that's something that it's our key theme.
Great. Thank you, Peter. I love that. We don't say no. Nice training, Connie. I'm curious, Beth or Connie, did you have something you wanted to add to that? Yeah.
A little bit. Just that first, I want to apologize for Peter and I. This is very difficult for us today. We had 2 people call in sick, and we only have 1 other staff member working who is now tutoring. So we have to keep jumping up for all of the people walking in. And so both of us, he just added a new staff member. I just had somebody that I had to sign a bunch of papers for. It's busier now than it has been in the last week, just because we're both online. So I apologize for both of us. Our big themes and our big ideas go back with the fact that we changed everything because of COVID. So we had different financial needs. Somebody wandered in off of the street who had just moved here, has a doctorate, and did her dissertation on working with young children in a special program, and was real interested in setting that up, which is a whole new program. We haven't been working with children. Then we have possible resettlements coming into the area. So the literacy councils throughout the state are watching what's going on and keep contacting me and saying, what are you doing for them? Are you ready for them? And I keep saying, we don't know yet. And we're trying to keep them calm. But our whole internal structure is always in momentum. It's a change continuously. So yeah, we're growing, but it makes everything else off balance.
Yeah, you raise all the key elements of the need for strategic planning and what growth does to an organization. And I just want to acknowledge the messy in your nonprofit is the messy in every nonprofit. And people are there and people are not there. And so offering a bunch of grace, hopefully tomorrow will not be like that. But I also, you know, you're talking about a lot of growth and a pivot out of COVID. And what does that mean for your organization? And so some of those themes, like new program, obviously is going to be your big idea. A growth in your market share with the incoming settlements, right? How are we going to manage that? And so, yeah, those are some great examples of big ideas that you're going to need to look at. And to Anne's point, you know, she's got a capital that she's looking at, right? Again, big ideas. And sometimes it's just managing the staff turnover, right? And how do we reduce turnover as opposed to keep them?
Neighbor's place on there, and
Connie, you're still on.
Oh, I apologize.
Thank you. No worries. All good. Beth, Linda, any thoughts in your space of what's showing up?
You know, I think for us at Big Brothers Big Sisters, we got the big ideas of like COVID was a good silver lining for us. Because at our level, we had always been very heavy school-based with our school-based mentors. And, you know, 15 months ago, school very quickly shut down and just everything changed very quickly. And we learned that we can be heavier community-based and we can serve children in a longer capacity with those adult mentors and things like that. So that's been awesome for us that we have had that opportunity. We're looking forward, though, to schools going back into normal session and volunteers being allowed back in. I think in terms of like structures and stuff, our national level is becoming very Jedi focused. And that's trickling down into our, our realm. And they're actually putting, standards in that not only staff has to take these trainings and stuff, but our board of directors as well, which is really awesome because, sometimes we encourage them to take things, but now if it's a standard of practice, they have to, which is awesome. And I think in growth areas too, we've talked a lot, we would love to do a capital campaign at some point and have our own facility space, because we have seen that with COVID, when things shut down, our bigs and littles need places that are safe to go and hang out and be together. So we'd love to have a space available for that to occur at some point. And then also just talking about as we grow, not only in staffing, but our board of directors, that we really want to find passion in it. Like passion is something that, when we have staff that have been bigs before, like have a reason that they're connected with our organization, the level of work and commitment that they do makes turnover a lot less, because they see the investment and they see the need and they see the reason why. And I think that goes hand in hand with not only staff, but our board of directors, that sometimes it's really great to find, a certain profession to be sitting on our board, but sometimes just having those people that are already really passionate can lead us in an even bigger direction as well.
That's a beautiful statement, Beth. I really appreciate your thinking on that. And how do we incite passion? And actually, the conversation of passion is also happening within my big brothers, big sisters for my client, of how do we instill, create, expand, and make that, a weekly conversation. I do really, I'm finding the whole Jedi conversation is challenging organizations to think differently about how they're delivering services, what their internal structure looks like, what their board structure looks like, and they're not always aligned. And so strategic planning, and particularly having a facilitator, potentially even a facilitator of color, to work with your strategic planning may be a really great option to blend the two Jedi conversations with your board and with your staff. I have one organization right now that board is on fire with Jedi, and they're making some incredible progress. She's got a staff of like 90, not a staff, staff employees of 90. And her board is like, what is Jedi? I don't think I want to play. That is not a thing, right? So that dichotomy, a facilitator could really help blend that dialogue, especially somebody that may have some expertise in the DEI space. So anybody else here want to add some thought as we think about those big ideas, and pulling themes together, and keep making that list, man. And then if you see at the bottom of this, prioritize. You build out the list. You can have 30 incredible themes or big ideas, but then your job is to prioritize and really think about that. So some questions that might be helpful to ask are, how are we measuring success? This also could get into some of your objective writing, right? And we can talk about language when we talk about objectives. Again, I would encourage this book it's got some terrific definitions and structure formats. So how are we measuring success in those key areas? Maybe it's financial, maybe it's programs. Of course, most of our programs have some level of metrics, because if we're grant writing, we need that. Or even in distributions, we have metrics in place to measure our efficacy and our impact. What's the plan for revenue diversification? Hopefully your board is asking that question. Are you diverse, or is all of your funding coming from one or two sources? Are you an organization that's strictly funded by the government? Are you an organization that's strictly funded by foundations? What happens if those two things fall out of favor, right? If you've got a foundation that's funded you for the last 3 years, what happens if they say, we've done enough, it's time for you to find other sources? Go there before you end up with some bad news, right? Do you have a succession plan? And this is, again, both for your staff and for your board. When you talk about board succession, how long is your pipeline? Do you have a list of individuals that you've built out? And are those individuals identified based on Jedi? Are they identified based on leadership skills? Are they identified based on profession? Are they identified based on all the demographic component that may or may not be really critical to your organization. And I just love this question. I'll reiterate it again, is what do we need to stop doing right now that is no longer serving the organization, that is no longer serving staff, that is no longer serving board, that is no longer creating impact? What is it that we need to stop doing right now? Just some fun questions. All right. This I just thought I would include because this is a structure that I use, a format that I use when I capture all the conversation. And it may help you as you build out your own strategic plan. So as you can see on the left side, under perspective, those are the buckets that generally I play in, that I find most organizations have something to say about, that identify their big goal, right? So generally, I think every organization should have some kind of financial goal. Remember, that's the big idea that helps you accomplish your mission, the high altitude view. So I always put that in, even if it's not even discussed, I always put it in because every organization needs to be fiscally responsible. So ensure financial health and viability of the organization, right? And then what's your benchmark, right? Or hold on, I have to move this bar. I can't see objective. The objective actually has to have a measurable component to it. So this one actually isn't a very good objective. It's more of a secondary goal statement or a strategic statement. But an objective would be during over the next 12 months, we will raise $100,000 for our program, right? And then the responsibility, really critical here. And the responsibility doesn't just have to be staff. You got to name a lead, who's in charge of that goal, but who's partnering? What board member can you bring in that conversation to partner with your staff person? I typically find committee chairs. If we're talking finance, I will invite the finance chair or the investment chair to come in and partner with CFO if there's a financial, or the development officer, and then the development chair of the board coming together if there's a fundraising goal, right? And then what resources are currently in place in the system, right? What's available to the organization that might make it supportive? Maybe there's an event that could be used as a resource. Maybe there's a partnership, right? A partnership within the organization or within your community where you can team with another group that's doing similar stuff. I think, Ron, you might have talked a little bit about some of the partnerships in your community that you might be able to work toward. And then timing. When will you accomplish this? What are your benchmark timing? Does this mean that you'll have check-ins on a quarterly basis? Does this mean you'll have check-in at the end of the year? What are the benchmarks? What's the movement forward that will allow you the lead lag time? Sometimes folks use lead lag indicators. And then status report. So what I love about this is actually a pretty easy tool to give to your board. So moving on, did you have a question? Who did I see? Come on. Mickey, did you have a question? Because I saw that you came online and I didn't know if you were thinking and you wanted to ask a question.
No, sorry, Lindley. I don't mean to interrupt. I had to buzz off the Zoom call and go do another meeting, and now I'm back to catch the end. So thank you.
So glad you're here. I just wanted to make sure that you weren't going, what is she talking about? So let's talk a little bit, Laura, to your point, what is strategic doing, right? And accountability. I love this comment. Accountability is the glue that ties commitment to results. Nothing happens if people aren't accountable for what their responsibilities are. That's why we have a lead. That's why we have the key players that are attributed to each goal to make sure that things happen and move forward. So strategic doing, this is where your action plans come into play, right? You've got your goals, you've got your objectives, which are your benchmarks or your metrics, and then you've got your strategies, the doing part, right? After the strategies, you've got those action plans that say, in order to put on our annual event, these are the things that this is the timeline that has to go into play to accomplish the annual event, right? In raising X amount of dollars. So that action plan is going to be that timeline or the list of activities that must happen over a period of time to accomplish that strategy, okay? And you can build that out for each of your strategies. So you can build your action plan will incorporate all your strategies and then the detailed work to the degree that is necessary within your organization, the detailed work that will allow your organization, your staff to move forward and know whether they're on or off track. That said, what I really love is how do we inform our board and make sure we're staying true to the big strategic goal, right? How do we make sure we're tracking properly? And that I like to encourage, and I would wish this was my idea. It is not my idea, it's Board Source's idea, but to use a reverse agenda. How many of you start with the consent agenda and then go to the president's report and then to go to committee reports and then go to maybe a mission moment, and then we talk about finances, and then, right, we've got this whole list of committee report outs. If you are really committed to ensuring everybody in the organization is tracking on your strategic plan, reverse the agenda. Bring your strategic planning report out to the very first item to be discussed, maybe after consent agenda, right? It is the first conversation that you have. You start with that. I have a foundation I'm working with. They've got, I don't know, I think they've got about 150 million in assets. They have 4 pillars, key pillars. They're mostly in education focus. They have 4 pillars. One actually happens to be JEDI, and the other 3 are education specific. And they have 4 board meetings because they've got folks from all over the country that come in for their board meetings. They take one of those pillars every board meeting, and they drive through the entire pillar and talk about it at their board meeting of where they are tracking on their benchmarks. I've got another smaller organization. It's a domestic violence organization. And their board was freaking out in building their strategic plan out because I made them have benchmarks. You've got to have an objective built into this and a timeline. And their goal was to hire an additional counselor. In order to hire an additional counselor, they needed to raise money. In order to raise money, they needed to bring on a grant writer. In order to bring a grant writer, they needed to raise money to pay for the grant writer. So they set a goal of raising $25,000 so that they could bring on a grant writer for 2 years. They were freaking out because it was in writing. And I said, here's the thing. Your goal is to check in 3 months. Where are you to that fundraising? If you haven't hit that $25,000 mark to hire the grant writer, okay, give yourself another month. Pivot, reframe the goal or reframe the objective. Right? But that's an opportunity to come together to have that dialogue because it is a working roadmap. It doesn't sit in a drawer and it's not hardcore. It's a working roadmap. Okay. So that I find is really helpful. And then the 30-30 review is what did we do? And this works really well with action plans. So Laura, this may be helpful for you. What did we do the last 30 days that was really great? What did we succeed in? Where did we miss the mark? And then the other 30 is what will we do for the next 30 days to move the plan forward, to move the goal forward. Okay. So it's 30 review and 30 forward. Okay. And there's actually a process out there in the strategic planning world that's called 30-30 review. That's much more detailed, but I think just being able to look back and then look forward and do it in a structured, consistent manner on a monthly basis, or maybe it's 60-60, whatever works for your organization, will allow you to check in with your strategic plan, keep it forefront, and keep your staff engaged in where have we been and where are we going. And then again, ask your committee chairs and your committees to support the process, to support the goal. And if there's relevance for your development committee to get involved with the financial component. If you're programming, if you've got a particular, or grant committee, if you're one of your objectives or your goals is to distribute X amount of dollars, how will you enlist your grant committees to help you do that? All right, I think I'm done. Is there any thoughts, questions? What can I answer at this time for you all? Thinking, thoughts, what's useful? What did you pick up today that you can carry forward? Love to actually, we have a little bit of time. I'd love to hear a little bit of something from all of your organizations. You can put it in the chat if you don't want to unmute yourself. What stood out for you? Ruth, do you have anything you wanted to comment on?
Yes, it's interesting that you're bringing all this forward because over the past 2 years, our entire board of directors has been completely restructured. We have purposed to go through and decide what kind of a board member do we need to bring forward to grow our organization to 750 care receivers. Right now, we are, through COVID, we are at like 220. We've lost them to that. So it's a BHAG, as you referenced earlier, but I'm seeing a huge change evolving within our agency, and so this program is so timely. I've been taking notes, and I want to get those reference books, especially the one that you had referred to. So I do thank you, Lindley, for sharing all that. And
oh, my pleasure. Here you go. How about that? Maybe that's helpful. There's a bunch of resources I want to share with you. Thank you for the feedback, Ruth. I hear the challenge with building your board, and it's a great opportunity to enlist people to think bigger and outside their circles of influence, right? To think differently about who they may bring in skill set, in different ways of thinking based on their lived experience that might allow you to expand even bigger and broader, not just in the sector, but maybe even beyond the sector, as far as folks to bring into your board. And thank you so much. I love the Working Genius model. It is super amazing. And I'm finding it really, really simple and user-friendly for organizations. So thank you for that. And yeah, that reverse agenda could change the way you run your board meetings, in my opinion. I've seen it work really effectively. What other big ideas came up for you? Kelly, any thought, or Beth, sorry, Beth?
I like the idea of, or at least the reminder that it's a working roadmap, because I think for us, we work really hard on developing this, and then we're one of those guilty people that it sits in a drawer. And I think we get to that because it's like, okay, we put all this work into it, and it's like, okay, great, but there's those benchmarks to hold us to, and we just kind of go, and put it away. And I think we just need that reminder that it's a work, like this is just a roadmap, that it should be working and breathing and living. And so if we don't hit every benchmark, we pivot, like we have to learn to do that and be okay with that.
Well, and if we didn't learn anything from last year, then forget it.
Exactly.
Because we hit a huge fork in the road, right? And most organizations had to pivot. Mickey, your thoughts?
Yeah, Lindley, I was wondering if, more of a question rather than a thought, wondering if you have a specific template that you really like to use. I think that sometimes our organization struggles with how to put it down on paper, and wondering if there's a specific form or template that you have found really great.
That's a great question, Mickey. The template that I showed you, a lot of my organizations just keep it in that format and then expand it. Most of my organizations, I give them that template and then they rewrite it. So to meet their needs. That came from something out of Harvard, I believe. So let me, Mickey, if you put your email in the chat box, I'll capture it, and or you can send it to me privately. I'll give you my email, and you guys can send me private love letters, only if they're love letters. And remind me so that I can actually get that for you. I have it way back from beginning, and I can't remember what I used. So, and it's pretty detailed. I like to sit at the higher altitudes. So something simple and bigger oriented is more helpful. I know as executive director, that may not be as user-friendly, but that tends to work for me. But I'll make a note, Mickey, to look for your email. Anything else? What else resonated with you and that you might be implementing in the next, coming weeks, months?
Yeah, I really liked a lot of the different things that were shared today. So I'm in development, of course. So you kind of have your eye on all the different moving parts in the organization. So our council just went through a structure change in staffing. We have a brand new CEO that is starting and going to be based out of Schofield. I'm so excited because that's my home office here. And she's going to be starting on the 19th. So there's a lot of new stuff that's happening. And so I kind of tend to dig being on the wonder and idea side of things. And now with the changes in our department, we're being asked to do more of that, you know, digging into action plan stuff. So I'm trying to figure out on a personal level how to bring that to our team so that we have kind of like a mini strat plan within a strat plan sort of.
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. And Laura, that reminds me that it makes a lot of sense to acknowledge that actually the development plan belongs in the strategic plan, right?
Yes.
It's a subset. It's the action plan to the for part of the strategic plan, right? A marketing, a Marcom plan, same thing.
Yes.
Marcom plan would be the same thing.
Yes.
So yeah. And congratulations for some nice movement into your neighborhood. That's kind of exciting.
Yeah, that's it's super fun and really looking forward to it. And you know, I think it was Beth that shared that there were some silver linings with COVID. That's really been true for our organization as well. And just being able to, you know, get people excited around ideas, basically, so you're raising money and empowering others in the organization, but saying, you know, how do we look at what used to only be in school programming and then during COVID was virtual and now it's some mixture of the two? Like, what does that look like? And what are we really dreaming about down the road? Because things are constantly changing, and we found that our organization could really step up and own an absolutely abstract, uncontrollable environment and still be successful. So
yeah,
where do we want to go with that, and where do we want to go with that with a new structure and a new CEO? So
yeah, I love that. I love that conversation. I think the other part of that conversation is, you know, we can talk about virtual events.
Yes.
How some of them were magnificent and they really worked. And we pulled people from all over the area. I mean, I know our Maravilla, we have a National Hispanic Cultural Center. It's for the entire nation.
Yeah.
And they had people from all over the country and actually all over the world attend their virtual event last year. So there were some really cool things that came out, as you pointed out, Laura, that came out, and also our friends over at Big Brothers Big Sister that came out of COVID. That should that stay, and should we pivot and move in that direction? I think that's a great point, and that's why strategic planning at this time is really critical.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate your input. Sue, are we at our time?
Well, I don't want to stop the conversation, but I saw that my battery is going low and I don't have my plug for my computer here. I just want to be able to take the chance to say thank you, Lindley, for being with us. Thank you to everyone who took their time to be with us for this session today. Hopefully you're all signed up for the October session. We're going to be talking about self-care, and that should be a fun topic. Jenna, I think we have a couple things we may send out after we are done here. But again, thank you all for being here. Fun things coming up. We have an exchange, a nonprofit exchange coming up next month. We're going to be talking about internal controls. And the nonprofit exchange is not where we bring in a presenter. It's an opportunity for you to talk about what's working with your organization, some suggestions you might want to make to your colleagues in the community. So join us August 11, I think that is currently scheduled for early in the morning from 9 to 10. So let's have some dialogue and good times. Hopefully we will be able to be together again in the same room soon, but for now this is working and it's great to see all of your faces. Thank you very much for being with us today. Just go back to our website, the nonprofit section, a lot of stuff in there for you. If there's any resources that you have that you can share regarding strategic planning, let's put it in the nonprofit exchange right on our website. Lindley will be using some of your resources and putting them up there as well. Last thoughts, Lindley? Thank you for being with us.
If you have, my pleasure. Thank you so much. And if you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to ping me. Have a great summer. We'll see you in the fall.